Hi everybody. Again, this series of lecture components are going to focus on Stanley Greenspan and his colleague Serena Wieder, Elaine Geller, my colleague, and their approach to intervention with children with autistic spectrum disorder, and that approach is what I term relationship-based pragmatic. And by that, I mean that, and the entire focus of the programming is communication between the clinician, or the caregiver actually, and the child. And it's in context of a conversation or communication, or what Greenspan calls circles of communication, that language evolves. Now, Stanley Greenspan was a psychiatrist, not a speech-language pathologist, but a psychiatrist. So his focus was on affect, and he brought to the field of speech-language pathology the idea that language doesn't only code content, that is ideation, through form, and is not only for social functions, but is also a means to express affect or feeling state. And in fact, Greenspan has stressed that there is no real meaning without affect, and that all meaning has attached to it feeling states. So when kids communicate, they are communicating, and when you and I communicate, in fact, we are not only communicating content of mind from the cognitive sense of our awareness and our ideas and our reasoning, but also our feelings about ongoing events. And again, it's the the Greenspan-Geller relationship-based position is that it is our affective connection with a meaningful other, and the conversations that occur, both verbal conversation and back and forth nonverbal communication, that ultimately leads to language development in typically achieving children, and should be the focus of intervention for kids with autistic spectrum disorder, who in fact have one of the hallmarks of autistic spectrum disorder, as we've discussed already, is the social emotional element of communication and establishing a relationship with a meaningful other. Now, I've already stressed another one of Greenspan's great contributions to speech, to our field, and to the field of autistic spectrum disorder, and that is his definition of the disorder ultimately as a multi-system developmental disability, which we reviewed a couple of lectures back. So that point of view of Greenspan's relates to his approach to another element of his approach to intervention. It is transdisciplinary or interprofessional. You may have heard of the term transdisciplinary before. I don't think I've discussed it. The term transdisciplinary can be contrasted with a term that you may be more familiar with, interdisciplinary. In an interdisciplinary professional interaction, you communicate with others who are treating the child or who have input to the child or interactions with the child, but usually not during your treatment session. Instead, maybe in a school during a resource room time, you would talk to a teacher, or you'll send a note home to the parent. You'll do something apart from your actual therapy session. In transdisciplinary or interprofessional work, you actually treat and engage other professionals and caregivers in the child's treatment sessions. You engage others. Why do you do that? Because you, first of all, others may have insight into the child's behavior and what might be contributing to it, what might be facilitating behavior, what might be challenging for the child. They may have ideas. And again, we remember that autistic spectrum disorder is a multi-system disability, so there are many, many factors contributing to the child's behavior patterns. So others have an influence on the child, not just us. So it's useful to interact with others and have them right in your space while you're treating, because the second point is that it's good to share technique. Good to share technique. My techniques for working with kids might be, I would like them to carry over outside of my clinical sessions. So if I include the caregiver, that is the parent with the child, in my sessions, I could actually demonstrate my technique and actually focus on training or teaching the parent technique, so that when they go home they can actually do some of what I do. Or if I meet, say the child has a vestibular issue or some kind of a tactile issue, a sensory integration issue, I need to know something about how I can address these issues myself. It's the OT who's the expert in this, the occupational therapist, not me, the speech-language pathologist. So it'd be very helpful for me to join this, the clinician, the OT, in her session, and be open to some suggestions that she might make to me, and actually practice techniques, learn techniques that she's demonstrating. Now, I don't like to learn from written directions. I don't typically read I just bought an air conditioner and I put it together and tried it. I didn't bother to look at the instruction manual. I'd prefer to be shown what to do as opposed to instructed by note, so to speak, or through an instruction manual. It's not the same. Hands-on, more effective. So that's what interprofessional interactions are about. You don't always work, by the way, in the same place at the same time with other professionals or caregivers. But if you have regularly scheduled meetings, even once a month or once every couple of weeks or something like that, you can impart knowledge from yourself to others. And that really ensures way better follow-up or generalization of both your procedures as a clinician and your goals. Well, Stanley Greenspan really promoted this in his work. What he did was he never worked actually with children directly. He worked with the caregiver or the parent, typically, or one of the family members in the clinical space that he was working in. Also, his colleague Serena Weider did the same. And what they would do is instruct the caregiver about a technique. So they would, and the technique related to DIR intervention and circle time. DIR intervention is developmental, individualized, and relationship-based. And as I said at the outset, relationship-based refers to communication between two individuals, and it involves an expression of affect, that is a feeling state towards one another and towards the information being expressed. And it focuses on the process that I think I've referred to before as intersubjectivity. The term intersubjectivity refers to, number one, the fact that language is a social thing. If you remember the videotape I showed you of my son Jordan's early word egg, and this is when I discussed intersubjectivity. You saw, he didn't only say the word to himself. He didn't mutter the word to himself, but actually he was reaching out and communicating with either me or the big red dog, one of the two of us. So the act of his communication was social. That's number one. Number two, language is, as we've stressed, an expression of intentionality, one's intent, what's on one's mind, what's conscious, we're conscious of at the moment. That's true for typically achieving children and true for kids with autistic spectrum disorder and anyone who talks. Speech is an expression of intentionality. And we all want others to acknowledge our intent. We want the person we're speaking to acknowledge our intent, to get it. They don't have to necessarily agree with it, but they should acknowledge it. We want the message to get through. And we want feedback, some indication from the other that message has been received. And in children, by the way, they're very, of course, self-centered because that's where they are at developmentally in terms of social development. So they especially want their message, just in their system, they want the message to be received and acceptable to the caregiver or to the other that they're speaking to. And they don't bother very much with trying to understand the other's point of view because they're not there yet developmentally. And kids with language delay especially may not be at that point of taking another person's intent in. They're interested in their intent and getting feedback that their intent has been acknowledged. Thus, Greenspan's approach is relationship-based and involves circles of communication. Now I'm going to stop talking right now and I'm going to insert a video. You saw one videotape of me, not me actually, a student of mine working with a young child blowing a balloon. They were working on blowing up a balloon. And I consider that a Greenspan type floor time intervention. That was a floor time intervention. I'll come back and discuss what the components of that are. But what that type of intervention was with that balloon, if you remember that from the previous lecture on, I think it's embedded in the lecture on introducing ASD. That young woman was promoting circles of communication. That is back and forth communication between her and the child around the child's intent, which was getting that balloon blown. I'm going to insert an unusual videotape here right now, and this was me working with a child, a very unusual child, also on the spectrum, and he was minimally verbal, seemed to be nonverbal, but communicated by singing or using tone. And you'll see me trying to figure out a way to engage him in to get circles of communication going with him. And then at the end you'll see me interacting with the mom to have her follow up on the technique that I used. So I'm going to embed that right now, and then I will come back and discuss some of Greenspan's objectives of his interventions, really the objectives of his interventions, okay? And also the developmental aspect of a floor time DIR intervention. Give me the light. Give me the light. Lights to shine in your light. Sit in your chair. Uh-oh. We'll switch in a second. We'll do a little more of this. Give me the light. Light. Turn on the light. Sit in your chair.
Ooh, sometimes house, shut off the lights, and then turn on the flashlights, and he likes to look the inside.
The house. I'll bring the box in. Oh. I don't know how to close the light. Close the, open the light. Close the, there it's on. Open the light. Sit in your chair. Close the light. Open the light. That's right. Close the. He's okay. That's gonna close the light. Wow! Look at mommy. Whoop! Look at Larissa. Open the light. Open the light. Ha ha ha. Ha ha ha. Ha ha ha. Ah. Look in my mouth. Oops. Here, take the flashlight. Look. Close the light. Open the light. Close the light. Let's let mommy do it. Loud. That's right. Shine the light. Turn the light on. It's okay. Close the light. Routine and circles of communication to really engage that child. It took me a while until the point where I felt I was successful, and that was with the mouth, reciprocal mouth shining of the flashlight routine. And then operating like Stanley Greenspan, I have mom there. I had also, the other woman was a student, it was a practicum. And mom was there, and she got to practice the technique that I was using, which was trying to engage the child in a goal-directed, intentional interaction based on the child's interest, which was light, actually. Notice that he was dilating, he was shining the light in his face. He liked doing that. I tried to redirect that into a more acceptable and adaptive routine, but using, again, trying to engage the child in an intentional activity, and then trying to help mom engage with the child in such an activity. What Greenspan often finds, you often find, is that with a child with disability, caregivers can be directive, because the feeling state is, well, I need to tell my child what to do. My child will learn by being told. And the Greenspan position is no, not by being told, but by being communicated with reference to intent. And I certainly share that point of view. In any event, Greenspan's DIR floor time program objectives are to develop and facilitate affect, social skills, and interpersonal communication, self-regulation and interest in the world, and capacity for emotionally rich experience and meanings. Emotional signaling of intent between the child, who expresses the intent, and the caregiver, who reflects the child's intent back to the child. And I think you saw that happening with the balloon activity, where my colleague was reflecting back to the child that she understood he wanted to blow up the balloon, and was engaging with the act of blowing up the balloon. I understood with that second child, Joey, that he intended to play with the flashlight, and I tried to engage him and with the intent to become intentional, to shine the light in my face or in my mouth. By the way, my working in the dark relates to, I often do that. I will turn the light out, not just because the child isn't interested in light, but sometimes it helps children focus in on one stream of information. Often kids with autistic spectrum disorder have difficulty handling multiple streams of sensory information coming at them at once. In any event, that's an aside, because again, what I was trying to then, what was going on with certainly with the second child, both children that I think you saw in the video, was there was back and forth reciprocal communication and emotional signaling of intent. The Greenspan tries to establish a co-regulated pattern where the child and the caretaker regulate one another's behavior. They go back and forth. The caregiver stops and listens and engages with the child. The child stops and observes and engages with the caregiver around a topic of conversation or communication. That is, the child related to the child's intent. And Greenspan believes that through many months of back and forth signaling, children learn to negotiate and understand the basic themes of life. Now, this is a psychiatrist speaking. This doesn't sound linguistic, does it? It will sound affective, but that's the professional that we're interacting with here. In an interprofessional kind of situation, that is a speech pathologist learning something from a psychiatrist about child development, and that is, through many months of back and forth signaling, children learn to negotiate and therefore understand the basic themes of life, such as love and dependency, anger and assertiveness, safety and danger, who is mom, and essentially learn about their world through affect. That is, of course, Greenspan's position. That doesn't capture certainly the full scope of language, but it's an important component. Spoken, by the way, presented as in psychiatric or affective terms. Okay, these are the first set of, and we're going to look at a list of DIR program developmental objectives, the objectives of Greenspan's developmental, individualized, and relationship-based program. Number one, a focus on the domain is attention. The first goal area is attention, and the objective is helping the child make attention from being fleeting to focused, organized and calm, even under stress. Number two, forming relationships, attachment, and engagements is the domain that his curriculum focuses on. And his goal is to move, the objective is to move the child from being aloof, withdrawn, and indifferent to others, to developing a deep, emotionally rich capacity for intimacy, caring for others. Domain, two-way purposeful communication. The goal, aim to transform aimless, fragmented, purposeless behavior, no goal, and emotion and a lack of emotional expression, to mostly purposeful, goal-directed, organized behavior in a wide range of emotions. Developing a complex sense of self. Performance that you're targeting. You're moving the child from distorting the intents of others, misreading cues, feeling suspicious, to reading and responding to most emotional signals flexibly and accurately. This particular domain certainly applies to children with Asperger's syndrome who have this problem with a major problem with content of mind, reading others, understanding that others have intent different from one's own, and paying it and recognizing the importance of others' intent and the tendency of others to make judgments about self. Next domain is representational elaboration and differentiation. Moving from putting wishes and feelings into action or somatic states, being unable to use ideas to elaborate wishes and feelings, going from that position to that level of functioning to using ideas to express a full range of emotions. The child is to be imaginative and creative most of the time, even under stress. Let me talk about this one for a moment, this business of putting wishes and feelings into action or somatic states where a child may start out from. I said, for example, hitting. I have a 13-year-old that I've worked with for several years in the LIU clinic. And this child, who's on the spectrum, as you know, kids on the spectrum like routines. They are often obsessed with, perseverate on routines. So this child loves to play with little miniature animals. And he has a set of little miniature animals that he likes to arrange before we start our sessions. If I interfere with that activity of his, or if one of these figures is missing, for example, the sheep disappeared recently, and in a situation like that where his routine is broken, he will get upset. And when he is upset, he doesn't say, "I'm upset." He doesn't use internal state, or at least he didn't in the past. Instead, he hits himself. He'll try to scratch me. He'll act out. That is, his wishes and feelings are somatic. They're sensory motor. They're expressed through action. At least in the past, was unable to code internal state. He wasn't able to say, "I'm happy," or "I'm upset," or "I don't like this," or "I don't want this." He expressed himself physically. So one of my objectives with him was to develop the content category internal state. But that means I had to get him to represent internal states and use words. We always tell the kids, use your words. Well, that requires suppression of the sensory motor reaction. And that requires development. And that was a challenge and continues to be a challenge with this child, but that is what Greenspan is talking about. Developing language to express affect and feeling states, and using language and suppressing this necessity to act out. manner. No connected language or speech, but speaking in one sentence or one phrase at a time or one word at a time. Also having an all or nothing approach to to things. The focus of the intervention is to develop logical, abstract, and flexible thinking. Things are good or bad, there or not there, etc. Moving that to having a sense of things on a more of a continuum. Triangular and multi-cause thinking is next, the next domain, and that goes to the older and the more developed school-age children unable to operate logically and develop the ability to think about and reflect on multiple reasons for a feeling. So that that's something that we could comment on a little bit. You know, somebody may bump into the child, and the child, first thing that comes into the child's mind is, he doesn't like me, or he did that on purpose, and the child acts out. To be able to think that there are several possible reasons, for example, that a child just bumped into me,